Yes, I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while, David, since I got to meet you. And I thought it would be kind of interesting to start out with a little bit about your CD pictures, because I feel like it gives us a picture of you and what you're about and about your feeling about jazz.
Well, the picture is an old-style CD package. I know it's a bit anachronistic these days to actually make a CD, but I felt like there's so much more to playing jazz than just the music, although the sound is the most important thing. But I love all of the venerable old albums that we listen to, in large part because of the information you gain by the pictures and the photographs and the liner notes, and sort of some peek into the thought process that underlies the result, which is, of course, the music itself.
The liner notes do explain so much for this particular CD. They go into, well, let's start with the musicians that you played with for this CD, because there's a little bit of a lead up that enabled you or gave you inspiration to create the CD. Is that not right?
Oh, absolutely. These guys are just incredible. You know, I stated in the liner notes that these are the most fantastic musicians I've ever had the pleasure to perform with, and that's no overstatement at all. These guys are just amazing. And the music, it is common, like if you go back to the Ellington Band or any number of iterations of Art Blakey's groups or Miles Davis's groups, the music is often so specific and personal to the actual personnel who are going to be executing that music. And I'm delighted to say that in this project, that was very much the case for a number of the compositions were literally written specifically based on how I knew these guys would breathe life into them. And so that was a huge part of the process. And, music is, well, not all music is personal, but that's the thing that I love so much about jazz, is that it's obviously completely spontaneous, or to varying degrees spontaneous. The jazz that I love the most is stuff that feels like it's made up on the spot, even if obviously certain aspects of the structure are preconceived and perhaps even worked over extensively. But the most successful performances, and this is true of classical music too, often you hear people rave about Horowitz performing Chopin or something like that, and the highest praise that you'll ever hear is, it sounded like it was improvised. So
That's true.
These tunes obviously are written down, and some of them are a little complicated, but these guys, I described them also in the liner notes as fearless. And this is truly a great description of these guys, because they show up at a gig, I throw a chart in front of them they never saw before, and sometimes that's the best performance we ever get, is like when it's so fresh, and they'll try anything. So that's been just an enormous treasure for me as a human being, as a composer, and as an improviser to have this opportunity with this very specific rhythm section.
And these musicians are Max Ridley, Plamen Karadonev, and Dave Fox.
Yes,
and
indeed.
They create the DAQ quartet.
Correct.
And you have also been performing regularly at the Lilypad Jazz Jam sessions. Is that not right?
That's correct. Yeah, I referenced that also in the album liner notes, because that's been an enormously important part of what made this 2017 CD possible, is that you can write great material, but if you don't perform it live, somehow it never comes to life in the same way. And the Lilypad Jazz Jam session is something I started, it's hard to believe, but almost 5 years ago now. And it just keeps getting better and better. It's like a kaleidoscope of people, always new people coming in. Some people come for a couple of years and then you never see them again, but there's always incredible talent coming in, and a really appreciative audience not only for my efforts, but for everybody who comes to perform and improvise at the jam session, or just to come and listen. A lot of people just show up to listen and enjoy the music. But as a composer, to be able to write a tune and then show up and try it with my group in front of live people is indispensable. So I've just gotten so much out of hosting that jam session, and it continues to be a real pleasure and a privilege to host that event. It's every other week on a Sunday evening, and it's a great time to come out and just take part in the jazz community in Boston, which is an unbelievable jazz community, as everybody knows. I mean, all the music schools, so many talented people coming out of all these different institutions, and there just aren't that many places to play, and even fewer places to do jamming. So this has been just a phenomenal experience for me.
So David, would you say that is part of your inspiration behind starting the Lilypad, was wanting to give that platform for jazz artists and other people that just want to go in and jam?
Absolutely. It's funny that I used to go out to the Acton Jazz Cafe, and they used to have jam sessions, several jam sessions every weekend. I think they had one on Saturday and then like 2 on Sundays. I think actually that's where I first met Dave Fox, my drummer. And, well, my drummer. I'm proud to lay claim to some of his time. Dave is an absolutely incredible brother of mine, and like all these guys, Plamen and Max, they all gig and work in so many different configurations. And I played for the first time with Dave out at a jam session at the Acton Jazz Cafe, and like so many other venerable venues in town, that went belly up. It's just really hard to keep any kind of a music venue open financially.
Very true.
And after that disappeared, I was really missing the jam scene, and I said, well, why don't I look into starting one? And I love the Lilypad. The room is just fabulous. So God bless Gil Aheron, the owner of the Lilypad. I sent him an email. He missed it, and then got back to me 3 months later and said, hey, that sounds like a great idea.
Right.
And off we go.
So David, I did read up that you were working on the Picture project for the last couple of years through working with the Lilypad. Like, what was the inspiration behind the name? How did you guys create the entire project? I'm curious.
Oh, great question. Well, it's actually, I don't think I spoke about this on the liner notes, but Picture, the name actually occurred to me. Well, it's the title of one of the tracks on the album. And my daughter, Sierra, who lives in California, I hadn't seen for some time. This is going back 8 years at least. And I got a beautiful photograph that she sent me. And it was quite remarkable, actually. Immediately upon looking at the photograph, this theme, da 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 da, this sort of polyrhythmic theme of Picture popped into my mind. So there you go. That was the name of the song. And then when I decided to do the album, which is all original compositions, that particular tune always stands out as a special thing, and so I figured that would be a good name.
So this has been 8 years in the making.
Oh, some of the tunes, there's one tune on there that I actually wrote probably about 25 years ago.
Wow.
A tune called Returning, and I actually only named it, I think, around the time of making the CD 2 years ago. But this was an improvisation or a little kind of quirky harmonic structure that I came up with, I say about 25 years ago, sitting at the piano when I scarcely played the piano at all. But I came up with something really good and remembered it for all those years. And then, so that's the oldest tune on the album, but some of the tunes are 4 or 5 years old, and as I mentioned, a bunch of the tunes were written just in the last 3 years or so that I've been working with this particular quartet.
Nice.
I just have to ask about the names of a couple of the pieces,
Oh,
because
we love them.
I tried to look up Puasm. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Puasm. So tell us, what does that mean?
Oh, you didn't study the liner notes closely enough. The acronym is indicated with an asterisk.
I didn't pick up on that. Bad me.
This is a little inside joke for the DAQ, because it is an acronym, and this gives you perhaps a somewhat troubling window into my sense of humor. But it's an acronym, and it stands for Plangent Ululations of a Soporific Mendicant.
Okay, in English this time.
And this is a really hilarious inside joke with the group, because imagine that Plamen, who speaks English perfectly, but he's from Bulgaria. He's asked me at least 5 times, what does that mean? And to be honest, I'm not sure if Max or Dave know what it means either. That's sort of the joke, you know. So, but the idea, again, this is one of these themes that came into mind. And I had this absurdist name for a tune in the back of my mind for a while too. And as soon as I heard that sort of stabbing, this stabbing theme of that tune, I knew it was a tune that I had to write down, and I knew that I was going to use that ridiculous, crazy name for it. And they have totally embraced it. I mean, they consider this to be our theme song, and it's so much fun to play with these guys.
It's really fun to listen to, too. But I'll have to read liner notes more carefully next time.
I have another question for you. What, tell me about the writing process, because you said one of the songs is 25 years older, I guess, and you've been with the band for about 4 or 5 years?
Yes, this configuration, just about 4 or 5 years, yeah.
So when it comes to putting together a project like this, how involved is the entire band with writing, coming up with the music, composing, etc.?
I write everything in a completely solitary way. It's all my ideas. But that's the incredible thing about jazz, is that I know I've got down what I need to get down, but I don't, you know, it's funny, like people who don't really know music or jazz, when they hear a quartet performance, it's like, oh, did you write out that bass line, or did you write out that drum part? And occasionally, like there's one tune, I believe it's De Cats on
De Cats.
De Cats, and which of course is a little play on words too. You know, my initials DA, so there's De Cure and De Cats. You know, I kind of play around with that a little bit. But that was De Cats has a bass line that I really like, and that needed to be written down, but only the first 8 bars of it, and then it's simile, like, you know, play a bass line like this. Give something like that to Max and just stand back, and that's one of the highlights of the album is the way he realizes that bass line. But so in answer to your question, it's really, you know, as composers over the years do, it's sort of a very solitary thing coming up with, like, it's not collaborative at all, creating the template for the composition. Okay. But then the moment you start to play it, it becomes completely collaborative. And actually, maybe it's a nice compliment to me, but they never suggest to change anything. They just take it and run with it. And
some good songs.
Well, I guess they're okay.
On that note, I had one question about, you described the musicians as generous. And I thought about generous in terms of, you know, kind and supportive and so forth. But I wonder if there's another generous meaning in the playing process.
Well, you kind of segue into something that's pretty deep for me. Great question, because, You know, as I often, when I introduce these guys, I say, these guys are not just incredible musicians. These are incredible human beings. And I should probably say it the other way. These are incredible human beings, and they actually happen to be unbelievable musicians as well. Wow. And, you know, that spiritual quality of generosity is at the core of just the way they live their lives, you know, and that comes through in the music. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people have it backwards, are trying to create a certain effect by how they play, often trying to play in what they conceive to be an impressive or, I don't know, new and different way. But if it's, in my opinion, if it's not totally grounded in who you are, how you live your life, what decisions do you make every second of your life relative to those in your environment, then it feels phony. And I don't pass judgment on other people's music. Some I like, some I don't. But what I have noticed is that people, well, you reminded me of a great quote from my website a little while ago that Igor Stravinsky said, "I feel my music is best understood by children and animals."
Yes.
I absolutely love that quote, because to me what he's saying is, and again, I'm taking liberty to interpret the great master Igor Stravinsky, but I've listened to a lot of his music. There's so much originality, just absolutely uncompromisingly revolutionary, groundbreaking innovation in his music. And he wasn't doing it to impress anybody. He was doing it because he needed to do that. And that quote, to me, touches upon something really deep of that. Yes, the music is intellectual. Jazz is intellectual music. You don't need to emphasize that. What you need to emphasize is how you want to feel when you're playing. How do you want, which is no different from a musician, than how do you want to feel in your life? And I think we've all noticed, if you have a bad feeling and you're near a child, the child instantly feels that. If you have a bad feeling and you go to pet a dog, the dog will instantly feel that. And I think that on a certain level, music is that simple. If you connect on that feeling level, you can connect to anybody.
So, which kind of reminds me of when we spoke before about the idea of this ego in music. And I love the fact that you said your band is generous and you guys have a lot of respect and collaborating is easy. Do you find that ego tends to be kind of like the downfall to why we don't see music as being easily interpreted, because people have to go out of their way to be impressive or to be the greatest, et cetera, et cetera?
I would tend to agree completely with what you just said, yeah. And I have a tremendous fascination for Eastern wisdom, I have to use finger quotes when I say philosophy, because Eastern philosophy has basically absolutely nothing to do with Western philosophy. It's not even the same thing. And I've read quite a bit of both. But, you know, the concern of Eastern philosophy is almost entirely the disease that is ego and how to remediate that problem. So unfortunately, in the arts, well, for me, because I love music so much, I'm just super sensitive to what kind of feelings are being generated by various particular kinds of music. And personally, I feel it's very common, and I suppose it's understandable, because people are trying to make their mark and accomplish something and make a career and make a living and all these different needs that they have. And that's fine, but when that becomes your reason for playing, then I think you have a problem. And you know, Herbie Hancock gave this incredible series of lectures about, he called it the ethics of jazz. What a mind.
That's a phenomenal set of Everybody needs to listen to that. It is unbelievable.
Herbie, I had the great privilege to hear a few of, I think it was a 5 or 6 series. Unfortunately, I didn't see everyone, but I saw like 3 of them live. And you talk about, I mean, we're so, it's such a treasure to have someone like Herbie still giving so much of himself. I mean, he could just retire and buy an island and go relax, but he's an artist. He has to give. And he said something about that, you know, that idea of compromising your musical output by doing stuff that you think is going to be to your advantage rather than what you really need to say. And he wasn't judgmental about it, but he did say, you know, if you might think you could do that and okay, it'll be better to pay the bills that way or whatever, but then when you go to say what you really need to say that's really true and important, it might not be there. And to hear Herbie say that was like, whoa, yeah, this is something all of us need to think about carefully.
There is so much in what you just said, and also it's funny because as I was reread the liner notes again and again from your picture CD, I just felt like it was sort of a lesson in philosophy, almost like jazz as a metaphor for living or being in some ways, like the characteristics of jazz, if you boil it down to its essential components. And you talk about honesty, or you said you start often with a melody in your composition, and that's, and correct me if I'm wrong, is sort of a way to be honest in a way, or that you want to bring your authentic self in your music. And that's on the compositional level. Is that true? Am I understanding what you intended there?
Yeah, that's pretty much right on the money. And I'm so thrilled that someone's actually reading those liner notes.
Except the acronym.
Does her research.
So I want to build on that because I wonder, we talking about, you know, musicians wanting to impress and focused on the ego and so forth. And I wonder if there's a potential antidote to that in being ruthlessly honest.
Amen. Wow.
What a question.
I couldn't have said it better. And believe me, I think about this stuff a lot, but I agree 1,000% with what you just said. And I would describe it in precisely those terms, an antidote. Because, you know, I just a few moments ago referred to what in all of the literature of, you know, the yogic tradition or the Taoist tradition, the Nagual Indians of Mexico, they all speak about the same thing. You know, Don Miguel Ruiz refers to it as the parasite. This thing inhabiting you that will eat your brain and eat your soul if you give in to the compulsions of being egotistical, you know. And it's kind of amazing that you guys are so aware of this, because it just comes down to awareness. If you have a disease and you don't know you have a disease, then you really have a problem. And I know that sounds kind of extreme, but these are the terms that people who spent lifetimes thinking about this stuff describe it in. So when you have a disease, you need an antidote, or you need the right medicine. And I feel that that's exactly what art can be, for precisely the reasons that you just so beautifully articulated, Ose. It's like there's a call to dig deep and find your own authenticity. Are you going to answer the call or not? And it's really, and the amazing thing about music, I love all the arts. I love dance. I love architecture. I love the MFA, you know, looking at 5,000-year-old flawless sculptures. It's all just mind-blowing. But the amazing thing about music is it's dynamic. It's happening. It's a performing art. And it will never come back. That nanosecond that just happened is blowing by you and gone forever. And so in a very unique way, it calls to everybody there to that authenticity. And you can't think about it too much when you're playing. You just got to try and be sincere and honest, as Papi was saying. Get away from your own ego and have the real courage to say what you need to say without being afflicted with concern of, oh, what are people going to think, and how's it going to be received, and am I going to be judged? That's not easy. But in my experience, and I think it's reasonable to say the only reason that I have the audacity to even attempt it is because I've seen other people do it. I just went to see Chris Potter at the Regatta Bar 2 nights back to back. I have never seen a greater musical performance in my entire life.
Wow.
And then I got a chance to say a few words to Chris. I've heard him play every chance I have, at least 30 times over the course of his career. And I've talked to him on a number of occasions. And there's just such profound humility and absolutely no posturing. And, you meet somebody like that who's giving so much, who has dedicated an entire life to honing the mastery of his art. In my opinion, is to a higher level than anybody who's ever played the saxophone. Yes, I know that's a crazy statement, but go and see Chris Potter and see what you think. Mm-hmm. There is not an ounce of ego in any note. It's not a single note that he plays. And I've heard him play a lot of notes. That's my main practice. Every day, I just put on Chris Potter and I play along with him. Wow. Why? Because he articulated himself in this beautiful documentary that he did, Open Minds, which is on YouTube, which is fantastic. Everybody should watch it. He's asked, Chris, how do you practice? He says, well, basically, and he's like a little kid. He's so unassuming, and he's just like smiling and just answering this question. He's having fun, And he's like, my practice consists of recording myself, listening back, and then trying to discern for myself, I'm paraphrasing, of course, what feels true and what feels false.
Wow.
And I heard Chris say that, and I almost fell on the floor. It's like, oh my God. I've never heard anybody say anything like that in my entire life vis-a-vis creativity. And the next thought I had is, no wonder he sounds the way he sounds.
Oh my gosh. So I have a thought about, you talked about, one needs to have the courage to be authentic and to dispense with the ego, and being authentic could be, we talked about that being an antidote, but what you're doing at the Lilypad, and even Papi, what you did with I Am Because We Are, and what I try to do, I feel like there's a need to set the stage and that platform so that people don't need to be fearful.
Right.
So there's some power that others have to create the atmosphere that allows you to be who you are without judgment and free to be authentic. And Herbie Hancock talks a little bit about that. Miles Davis created that platform for him to some extent gave him the freedom, even when he played that infamous wrong chord in Stockholm. That is the best story, where Miles Davis turns around and does a little doodly-doo that makes it all right, Yeah. And Herbie Hancock didn't feel any judgment, and it's that he talks about that quite a bit, that atmosphere.
Yeah, and once again, it ain't just music, and it ain't just performing. This is life,
Absolutely, totally. I mean, that's why Herbie Hancock is talking about the ethics of jazz. It's not just about on the stage or in the studio. It's like, okay, carry this to everyday living and how you interact with people. But I feel like, jazz, what you're doing at the Lilypad and just how you talk about it, it's like, yes, it's music, but maybe we all need to become jazz musicians. I don't know.
Maybe.
Well, to me, jazz does present a remarkably special opportunity. And of course, I'm going to say that because I'm a total jazz head and have been for decades. But I think even from an objective standpoint, like there is something very unique about jazz because you do it as a performing art. I love watching people make physical things. I could watch have watched glass blowers like for hours on end, or watch somebody sculpting or throwing pots. It's all, the process is dynamic, but in jazz, it is the process. There's nothing other than the process that's all there is. Once you stop playing, there ain't nothing left. It's all gone. And, so much music in jazz, a lot of stuff is written down, as I allude to in the liner notes. Like, you use these notations, themes, whatever, as points of departure. But everybody knows the idea is to make up something completely original on the spot with no premeditation that says something that feels true to you. And at the exact same instant that you're doing that, whether there's 5 people in the room or 100 people in the room, everybody has the opportunity to ride along with it. And I suppose, dance, someone who's really into dance probably feels exactly that same way about watching somebody move. I just don't, to me, there's not the same connection. Somehow, music, even though it's unbelievably abstract, like what's this, something I ponder all the time. Why can music, instrumental music with no words, maybe on instruments you've not even very familiar with or never heard before. I listened to some Indian classical stuff and it's like, oh my God, or koto music from Japan or something. Like that's perfect truth, and there's no words anywhere near it. How does that work? I have no idea, but you will get broad consensus on when somebody gives a really masterful performance, even in an idiom or from a culture that the audience doesn't even know. So that's the mystical thing about music. That for me is very, very unique. And it totally connects to what you're talking about, Ose, that this authenticity, that this trying to be honest.
Do you think, this is a crazy question, but do you think jazz was meant to be, as a musical idiom? Like, was it in the cards from the beginning of the creation of whatever, of life? Like,
that's a great question. Was jazz meant to be?
Yes.
What a great question. Jeez, well, of course I would have to answer in the affirmative, but it's, you made me think of, years ago I was talking with my mom about Mahler's Ninth Symphony, and, if I had to pick a favorite symphony of all time, it would probably be Mahler 9. And I was just struggling to try and express why that opening first movement was so mind-blowing to me. And the best I could do is say it doesn't feel like it was created. It feels like it was discovered. Like this was something that was just there for all time. And finally, some incredibly gifted, crazy genius found it and was able to formulate it in such a way that everybody could participate. Mahler is a tremendous influence on me. A lot of people just can't do Mahler because I understand. His symphonies are 90 minutes long.
They're long and they're dense sometimes.
It's a lot, and the emotional intensity is just unbelievable. But, he was an incredible philosopher, and he would just go up into the Alps in Austria, I believe, and he just had like 3 months a year to compose. Imagine if he didn't have to conduct all year long, all the symphonies he might have written. But he would go up into the Alps and write in this funky little shack with this crummy little upright piano, and he was in heaven. And if he had any writer's block, he'd just go walking through the fields, and take in the nature, the beauty of the Alps. And he said that, I don't know if this was in response to a particular question, but he said that as a composer, his greatest hope is that if somebody was born blind from birth and never had the opportunity to walk through the Alps and see the natural beauty of that surrounding, that by listening to his music, they could partake and experience some of that. And talk about a lofty aspiration. So vis-a-vis your question, I think that all of us in our own humble way, I mean, I ain't no Mahler, that's for sure, but we have something. I feel this as a certainty. Everybody, every human, with perhaps only a very few really pathological exceptions. Every human has something completely unique and unbelievably beautiful. And that, maybe that's what the only function of life, or the only purpose, reason for this painful experience called life. Let's see if we can dig that out and surface it, and maybe it will help somebody else if you can. And so that's the way I look at your wonderful question, is like, yeah, there's stuff that's just kind of there that's really beautiful, and can we figure out how to share that?
Mm-hmm. Maybe there's some universal principles, like you allude to. You describe jazz sort of as a mirror to the creative capacity of nature itself.
Exactly.
And so, if not jazz, some other form, that there's this drive to share what is so powerful. Nature being one of those powerful forces. So that's incredible. And do you think you were meant to be a jazz musician? You started with classical, right?
Right. And that's a great setup for a question that I wanted to ask you,
Please.
Which was, going over your bio, I know that you were born in New Jersey, you've lived in California, you lived in Mass, you've gone to various schools studying music. And how do you feel like it has impacted the way that you see music, the way that you make music, the way that you create?
Yeah, I've lived in a lot of different places, but just in the United States. But I went from coast to coast, and boy, the West Coast has a very different flavor than the East Coast, for sure.
How so?
Just so much more laid back. God, people in New England can be a little tense, a little uptight sometimes.
10 and 2.
But everywhere you go, every experience, I think most artists would agree. Like your output is just somehow an articulation of what all your various diverse experiences are, and of course, studying in different contexts under different people was influential. As at UC Santa Cruz in California, and studied with this crazy mad scientist sort of composer, David Cope, who it's not very well known these days, but he composed some wonderful stuff, and he was a real groundbreaker in terms of electronic music. Nice. Way back when everything was on magnetic tape, before we even had any digital processing. This goes all the way back to Edgar Varese and the 1929 World's Fair and music concrète and all this stuff. He was, so all these influences somehow work in, but as far as specifically how they unfold in a jazz life, well, it's kind of funny to consider, because again, I think I mentioned in my liner notes of picture, like Duke Ellington, Miles Davis, and I'm sure many others, but those were probably the most famous. They didn't like the word jazz. It's Miles. It's just a made-up word. Mm-hmm. So it's just semantics. But what does jazz mean to you? I mean, I think that I very much agree with Chris Potter on this. In that Open Minds sort of documentary, he refers to his work with the Underground Quartet, which is really like a heavy-duty funk outfit. But he says, almost with a glimmer of pride and a glint of pride in his eye, like, yes, I know, this is kind of heavy funk, but I think it's very true to what jazz can be in the best sense of the word. And to me, when I hear a towering master like Chris say something like that, what I hear is that, jazz is your vehicle. And it's, you're not interested in jazz. You have to get in one vehicle or another if you're going to go somewhere.
That's a good way to put it.
But that, I think it's very much the same thing as what Beethoven was doing when he sat down at the piano and improvised and just slew the salon full of people. I read a biography of Beethoven recently, and he laughs about how he could just systematically make everybody in the salon cry just by how he played. I mean, literally, everybody would be like sobbing, and he'd be laughing to himself. J.S. Bach was maybe not quite the same prankster, but he was the same way. He'd go into church without any idea and just play an entire mass. I mean, that's jazz.
Yeah, that sounds right. To sort of wrap up, final question, and feel free to chime in, Papi, but what do you hope the impact of your music, or maybe music in general, will have to improve how things are today for people?
What do we need to improve?
You're right. Silly question.
In this climate?
Right.
Oh, my God.
Loaded question.
These are desperate times. These are really desperate times. People have so profoundly lost track of what it means to be human. I know that sounds like an incredibly opinionated statement. That's my opinion. We're in dark times, and I think that I'm not concerned about my musical legacy. I'm just not. I just don't think of it in those terms. What I'm concerned about is, I do have I'm blessed to have one incredible child, my daughter Sierra. Yes, I absolutely want to make sure that we don't burn the planet out from under her feet. But further, it's not just a personal concern. It's the entire situation is very challenging for everybody, and the younger people trying to grow up on this planet at this time. This is
yikes. This
is tough. There's some crazy, unprecedented stuff going on. So absolutely, my hope, and I know that your intent with the Malden art scene, and Papi, your intent with I am because we are. Did I say that right?
Yep.
Like the whole, what's the term again? The
Ubuntu.
Ubuntu. This fundamental, not an intellectual understanding, but a visceral, felt understanding of, well, that simple old saw of it. A rising tide raises all vessels, or, we all sink or swim together. These aren't just platitudes. This is truth. And, the funny thing about so much really important truth is that it's so simple that it's immediately dismissed. Everybody wants complexity. Everybody wants to be clever. Everybody wants to do something unprecedented that nobody ever thought of before. I don't see a whole lot of good coming out of that, which is essentially a narcissistic drive to promote yourself in some way. And so my hope, and really my conviction, is that art has an incredibly important role, and perhaps the central singular role in bringing people back to a recollection of why we're even here. And if people can't start remembering why we're even here, sharing this tiny little planet with all these billions of people, it's not looking good.
Dun, dun, dun.
Right. No, I agree. And I think even more, if we can co-create, even the capacity to think of solutions, or co-create the hope, or co-create, which, again, goes back to a kind of musical feel, improvisation, but I feel like that's really necessary. No one person can solve like any number of problems, but we have to come together. I feel like music and art does that, brings people together, and it can even inspire, scientists or people solving actual technical problems that we have to solve, like global warming or.
And I think it's a great thing that, the three of us are here that create platforms for people and create platforms for creatives to come together, to rejoice, to commune, and just to share love, understanding, and appreciation for the arts. And I think we should do something together. And maybe it'll be cool, but that's just me.
I like it. Well, David, thank you so much for talking to us.
Oh, thank you. This was a fabulous little collaboration right here, right now, and it was really a lot of fun. Thanks so much for entertaining my musings.
Of course. Thanks for giving me a bunch of stuff to watch on YouTube and look up now. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you for listening. This is Culture Matters, and I am Osa.
And I am Papi. Have a good night.